This week on Great Chat, what happens when crisis hits? Is there a playbook? What can we learn from the Deel Rippling saga? And each week we answer your questions. Don't forget to submit them at anothergreatchat.com. I'm Sally, and the entire gang is here this week.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi.
We are back from our offsite, relaxed, refreshed, ready for season 2.
Those of you who didn't have flight delays and get in at 2 a.m. in New York, refreshed would not be the word I would use, but very, very inspired, very motivated.
It was nice to be all together. I learned so much. I've been frantically Googling Korean stickers for your face for sun protection, which Sally introduced me to at our
No, my mom introduced me
These are the epic conversations that we were having. You know, we have lots of exciting things planned for season 2, but we talked a lot about skincare, and Mac took me down a rabbit hole on red light masks, and Helen and Ashley led the way on what it meant to be a consumer in the modern age. Like Helen walked into that gift shop and just picked up a pair of pants and trying them on, we ate, we drank, we laughed. It was a great time was had.
I don't like to try on clothes.
You gotta get those purchases in before the tariffs hit, right? Like there's some real urgency.
Which, by the way, speaking of tariffs, I know I shared with this group chat, but I thought it was crazy seeing the journal reporting about all the baby products going up, because just so many of my friends, I think of all of our friends, are having babies right now. And so they're keeping track of that. The Uppa baby that I keep hearing about is going from like $900 to like $1,200, which again, like already pricing is absurd. And so I don't know, there's a lot of stress all around.
This is really making the case that I got to just keep holding on to this stroller because it just keeps appreciating in value. Like it's become an Hermes bag at this point.
It's a little bit like how during the pandemic, used cars my Prius went up in value briefly because of scarcity. So yeah,
I did not take you as a Prius girl.
Oh my gosh, I have like an 18-year-old Prius.
I love that.
That's what I drove around the country in for 2 years during the pandemic. So I'm like, Ashley in 2009 made her decision, and Ashley in 2025 is still holding strong.
There's a whole data book for anyone that wants to go down a nerdy journey from Apollo that has a bunch of interesting stats on this. But one of the most interesting numbers was the percent of consumers making just the minimum payment on their credit card balance. It's the highest that it's been in the past 13 years. And so it's just like an interesting indication of where the consumer is. And we haven't even really seen the tariffs hit.
I mean, I think also the prices are starting to show up. I think it's just hilarious what we're seeing this morning of the debate between Amazon and Jeff Bezos and the pricing that they were going to put on for the increase in tariffs on Amazon.com. And then I guess what CNN is saying is that Trump called Bezos this morning, given that they've gotten a lot closer. And all of a sudden they're like, no. Like we weren't even considering that it was a small group within Amazon, which I think is so crazy.
Maybe Amazon won't do it, but that's OpenAI's edge, is they can show the tariff cost. It's just data, you know.
I don't know that Sam Altman's going to be the one to stand up to Trump.
Is OpenAI the next everything store? Like, I'm so curious and confused by what this offering is going to be.
I'm looking for a new coffee grinder, and I'm starting to just look on Perplexity, and
that's totally right.
I do think it's this whole idea of AI shopping is really interesting, because I would totally use it for something like a coffee grinder. But I tried buying, as you guys know, I have been on my cowboy boot game, because I'm finally like in spaces where it's fine to have my cowboy boot obsession. And I was trying to use Perplexity and then ChatGPT and then also Claude to find discover new brands, because I was like, oh, this might be better than Google. No, they kept serving me up the worst stuff. Like, I don't trust it for fashion yet. I would love to, because how nice would that be? Like, I am dying to find a pair of square toe satin flats that look like point shoes a la Ayeti, but without spending $300 on a pair of flats that's gonna get ruined.
Try plush.shop. I
Okay.
just tried it. I'm not an investor.
Hell yeah.
It's awesome. It's exactly what you're saying.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. I can't wait.
I love it. We just solved Mac's biggest problem.
Right. That's right.
This is why group chats are important, because this is where you get all your
Discovery.
Speaking of group chats, one of the articles we were commenting on in our group chat over the past couple of days is the Semafor piece by Ben Smith on group chats. So how meta is that? And just for anyone who hasn't been following along on the Twitter drama around this article, Ben Smith, writer at Semafor, founder of Semafor, was leaked information about a group chat called Chatham House. It has 300 like very powerful members, mostly male, ranging from like David Sachs to Tucker Carlson to Mark Cuban. And sort of the central drama of this story was, I guess, when Balaji, the former CTO of Coinbase, and Joe Lonsdale of ABC and Palantir got into a group chat fight on the topic of China. But Ben used this article to sort of zoom out and talk about the impact of group chats broadly, especially in Silicon Valley, and especially maybe as Silicon Valley has moved further to the right. And Helen and I were both taking note because we're actually doing a panel on this topic at Bloomberg Tech and SF. So if you'll be there, come heckle us. But the two things I thought were super interesting about this piece. One, Ben interviews a writer named Thomas Chatterton Williams. Like, I love that chat is literally in his name, who's in one of Mark Andreessen's apparently many group chats. And his point, I think, is such an important one, which is that to a casual observer just following along on the conversation on Twitter or the headlines, you can think that broad consensus around topics is happening organically when it's actually like pretty orchestrated, and there's sort of this invisible coordination happening in these group chats as people are sort of honing in on certain views for the industry. And so I think that, like, as a viewer, if you are not in these like super high powered group chats, is an important thing to keep in mind, especially if it feels like, the Overton window has shifted very quickly, like what might be behind that. And then the second thing, I was just thinking, it's funny, Balaji tried to make this into a sort of anti-media moment, and scold Ben Smith for writing this piece. But of course, Ben wasn't in the chat and then leaking the chat. Someone in the chat leaked to Ben. And so it made me think, is there like a Dunbar's number for the max number of people that can be in a group chat, or the type of ties between people that need to exist in order for a group chat to have some anticipation or expectation of privacy. And I think outside of like group chats that are, maybe a group of friends like ours, if you're in one of these groups, these industry groups, I think you have to assume that like anything you say can be used against you in an article, in in a Twitter screenshot, because people are going to leak things that they think make themselves look good. And so, it was only a matter of time before a 300-person group chat was introduced to the broader world.
I'm definitely not in all of those group chats, but like I am in some that are like tech VC, and there are, a handful of what I would call red-pilled folks in there. But the thing that I was thinking about was there are also some journalists in every single one of those group chats. And that actually got me thinking about like journalism and like careers in media, and how, like, we've talked about this on the pod before, that so much of that, because there are fewer jobs and, they're not super high paying, it's like so much of that is to like have access to like the source and be in those conversations. And I think everybody knows when you're in a group chat with a lot of spicy talk, right? If you leak or do anything crazy, like you're gonna get kicked out of the chat. So like it's super interesting. I think there is like a power dynamic, and I also think there's like some level of influence that those chats can have on like career reporters that are in the chat, probably not saying a lot or just asking really good questions, but it's sort of like understood that they're not going to go write an article about it. So that's why I thought the Semafor article was so interesting, and like how maybe Balaji was like sort of trying to mislead people to believe that he was not supposed to be in the chat, or that he was the leaker. It was like, clearly that's not a thing. I think access to information is probably the most important thing for
I thought the most hilarious thing about that piece was when I think it was David Sachs was like, oh, like this group chat is tainted. And then like, I think it was like Eric Thornburg and like two other people like exited the chat, and God knows like where it all spawned again. But that was
Do you guys read that piece from Shriram Krishnan a couple, like maybe like last year, that was like the types of group chats or like the rules of group chats, and that how that there's always like a n-1, right?
No.
Like yeah, basically he's saying that there's great chat, us, and then like, there's like one without Sally. And we are talking about all the things. Yeah, exactly. No,
Helen,
he
you
was
weren't
saying
supposed to
that.
tell her
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
What?
But that's what he was saying. And he made a joke about it. It's like, and if you don't think one exists, like, boy, do I have bad news for you. But I thought that was kind of interesting too.
Sally, I'm sorry you had to find out like this.
And did Taylor just take me off my screen? So I'm kicked out of the group chat and I'm kicked out of the screen.
Actually, this is kind of a good tee up for our main topic on crisis comms because, the way we all learned about this Semafor piece was when Balaji like took to Twitter and made it this like anti-media moment. And of course, so we were all waiting for the Semafor article. It's like a repeat of the Brian Johnson situation where he told us the New York Times article was coming. So everyone's like, "Ooh, I can't wait to read the New York Times article." But like as a former comms bro, like I have been thinking a lot about how a lot of my prior sort of assumptions about the crisis comms playbook have maybe been shifting, and just to root us in what I think the best practice used to be. And this was like a line that came from Jesse Darris, who runs this agency called Darris that works with a lot of top consumer brands. Like the goal with a crisis is to figure out what the end is and get there as quickly as possible. So, if you have an exec who did something terrible, if you if you messed up and exposed a lot of customer data, like what is the end state that is going to allow you to restore trust? Is it apologizing? Is it firing? Is it launching an investigation? And rather than wasting a bunch of cycles and letting the story be shaped without you, move as quickly and confidently as you can so that you have a chance to turn a crisis into a trust building moment. And I think that was actually like a pretty reliable playbook. I no longer think that is like the crisis comms best practice, at least in this crazy moment that we're in. I actually think the greatest mistake that people make isn't not moving quickly enough. It's actually overreacting and assuming that a certain audience cares much more than they actually do. And a lot of that is, tied to this crazy news environment we're in, right? Where there are insane news cycles every day, and I think people are just faced with such a barrage of information that it's very hard to know if you do have would people have focused as much on this group chat story if Balaji hadn't tweeted about it? I don't know, we don't have that counterfactual, but anyways, I think my theory now is that there's a barbelling of crisis comms. And on one end, we have what I will call the Huberman approach. So if you may remember, there was a New York Magazine article last year about Huberman having like multiple girlfriends at the same time. And, they came forward and they shared some of their experiences with him. And, unlike in the apology notes era, Huberman didn't even acknowledge it. He literally just posted and podcasted his way through. And the reason I think that worked was because his core audience either didn't care or actually thought it only like made him look cooler. Like, he's like a productivity guru. He can have all these girlfriends at once. And then at the other end of the spectrum is someone we've already talked about, Brian Johnson, with that New York Times piece about NDAs at Blueprint. And he preempted that story and actually took control of that narrative to make it about something it really wasn't, which was his past relationship, to sort of distract from the actual contents of the article. And so on the one hand, you have someone just completely ignoring a negative story. And on the other hand, you have someone leaning into it, but being louder, at least with a core audience, and really like shaping what that story is sort of on their own terms, and also with the understanding that like most people won't actually read the piece. They'll read the news, like the sort of chatter around the piece. And so curious what you guys think. I feel like there are a bunch of examples we could look at recently to talk about this, but I find it's like we're in a very interesting moment where like the old playbooks, I think when we see them trying to be used, they just feel so stale and don't resonate. And like, You either Huberman it or you Brian Johnson it in the modern era.
Well, I'll push on that a little bit because I think both Huberman and Brian Johnson have huge distribution, right?
Yeah.
And so I think like, you know, what often happens is when there's comms advice, you know, on a podcast or on Twitter or something, like people will take a lot of things very literally and not reflect on like, well, what are the differences between me and like, you know, these examples on the two ends of the spectrum. And so I think the distribution part is really, really important because what I actually thought of was like, remember like Henry Ward's Carta email he sent to like literally every Carta user about like, hey, there's an article coming out tomorrow about TechCrunch and it's bad, like don't read it, or here are some points to refute their claims. And I'm like, I wasn't gonna look for a TechCrunch article tomorrow, but I sure will now. And like, so maybe he doesn't have a huge Twitter following, but he has a massive email distribution list, right? And so I think that in this era of like, you know, founder mode and go direct, like it's just all of those barriers that used to exist sort of like were maybe they weren't there by design. I think that they were there in some combination of bureaucracy and inefficiency, but like getting a public message out there through, you know, a formal channel, like there are all these steps and there are all these people involved. So I think you see more people sort of like overreact and then, you know, have hot fingers and just kind of go, right?
Totally. I mean, that's my point though. Like the biggest mistake you can make is overreacting. If you are going to overreact, you have to be someone who benefits from the drama and benefits from the controversy. This isn't maybe the best playbook for like every business. I think it really depends on your brand and core audience. And actually, maybe a great example to dissect is Figure, like the robotics company. I hadn't even heard of Figure before, although I'm not, you know, deep in the robotics world, so I don't know that I'm the right barometer. But this isn't, I think, a founder who has like a huge profile, right? He's not a Huberman, he's not a Brian Johnson, he's not a Henry Ward. But he leaned into a crisis moment in a way that like put him on all of our radar, and actually, it was his response to an article about his company that sort of got our attention. So maybe just like the very TLDR. Figure has a partnership with BMW, with like these humanoid robots that are going to help in their factories. And Jason Del Rey wrote a piece on sort of like on the discrepancy between the way Brett Adcock, the CEO, was portraying the partnership versus the reality on the ground and in the factories in terms of like what these humanoid robots are actually doing. And if you just look at this purely from like a crisis comms perspective, you would think maybe he botched it. Like maybe he did another Henry Ward Carta, like I'm going to alert you all to this bad press, because his LinkedIn and Twitter posts were, I think, what drove a lot of us to go back and read Jason Del Rey's article on the sort of discrepancy. And that's sort of like a Streisand effect moment where you actually end up drawing more attention to the bad thing by, you know, trying to push back against it. And in his case, he like threatened legal action or said, you know, the company was about to take legal action. Mac, I feel like you have like a hot take on the Figure approach.
We've seen over the last couple of years, people start to really wake up to the rage farming. And I think it's extreme to call this rage farming, right? I think that like if I were sitting in Brett Adcock's shoes, I'd also be annoyed, even if it was a very small thing. You're trying to accomplish something insane, and somebody's coming here saying, well, I think actually I have a nitpick on how you're doing it. So I think part of it might just be genuine, but then there's also this bit to you guys' point, like a lot of you had never heard of this company before, and suddenly you know who it is and you know who Brett Adcock is. People who, like me, are, you know, general believers in this space are now paying even closer attention. And people who are like religious Brett Adcock fans are now enraged. And so I think like you've now essentially not only drawn attention to your name in the all press is good press sort of genre of it, you've also like mobilized your base to rally behind you. And there's so many ways you can harness that power. So I think that there's also this bit of like posting through it, even if it draws attention to the negative thing, doesn't only draw attention to you, period, but also has this mobilization effect that you see across rage farming everywhere. And like, I don't have a real strong stance on whether or not that's good, but I do think that there's a bit of that going on here because the true believers are going to get really excited. And I think that there's something very smart about that.
I want to go back to like the deal rippling with all that we've talked about. Like, what is the next move for them? Because I feel like both of them have tried to use various tactics of like what we talked about, but it's not like going above the fray. And then of course, like the latest on Deal is now they're getting served. So like, what's like Deal's next move?
I feel like if your deal, what you want to do is turn this into a Blake versus Justin style PR scenario, and if you're rippling, what you really want is a Kendrick versus Drake here. You want it to be like decisive, fast, and clearly in your favor. And if your deal, what you really want to do is just completely muddy the waters. Oh, maybe they spied on us too. And then like there's all these like very technical, like drown them with information, put so much stuff out there that no one wants to pay attention and follow along. And if you're Parker, you're like, no, dude, you had a guy with a cell phone in a bathroom, like trying to escape and getting weirdly obsessive about our Slack messages. Like, you want to just drop the album and then just keep repeating the message over and over again. You're fucking weird. Why are you doing this? This is not normal. But I do think it's really interesting, and you're starting to see Deal follow that playbook of like, let's just drown them with information. Like, first they came out silent. They were waiting to see how people were going to react. People reacted, obviously, and had really strong takes. But I think it'll be really fun to watch. This one, I just assume that I struggle to imagine what type of information they could drop that could make me get bored here, because I've seen a lot of rap battles. I have not seen a lot of corporate espionage. So
Mac, I think
there's
you
a
just
higher
love,
bar.
I have the
you
opposite
just love
view.
HR tech.
I do. You know what? It's just passionate. I'm passionate about fintech. Okay, we're back, baby. In the words of
Like,
Helen Min.
neither of the founders are attractive as Blake and Justin, and neither of them are as culturally informed or
Angela,
relevant.
that's rude.
How dare you talk about Parker like that?
But Parker's performing at the Super Bowl in February.
My
So
question is, do people even care? Like outside of like a small like tech VC world, like I don't know. I think they would love to be as culturally relevant as all those examples. So you're really pumping them up. My take is just I don't think anyone cares anymore, and I actually don't even think most of Silicon Valley cares anymore at this point.
I have like no horse in this race, aka like no equity exposure to either company. I think Parker dealt such a decisive blow with the initial narrative drop around like the corporate espionage and the honeypot. And then I think like this Deal rebuttal was just like, it had like too much going on, but it didn't have any like silver bullet. I mean, I think they alleged everything from like Parker was a mediocre student in high school to like, oh, there are like rippling spies too. And I think they're trying to do the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni thing, but like actually like we were just so happy with the honeypot and the guy in the bathroom with a cell phone, and like I feel very sated. Like I'm thank you. I have my like sexy corporate espionage story for the year, and so I think Deals would have to have something a lot more damning to sort of like, you know, make us be like, oh wait, we're on this side now from a narrative perspective, from an entertainment perspective. So good luck to that team. But I'm like, I think I'm like, you know, Team Parker, you know, for the foreseeable future, barring any new information.
I think Deal knows that they're never going to be like, we're Team Deal strongly after that opening salvo. But I do think that they're just trying to be like, let's make it so muddy that nobody really wants to like engage with this anymore. I think that has to be the strategy. There's no winning at this point, but it sounds like this group is pretty aligned that someday we're going to hear Parker Conrad go, they're not like us.
But we did learn something, which is we thought that we had discovered the boundary of founder mode, which was corporate espionage. But what we have learned is that is not the boundary. Founder mode goes.
that's right. That's right. A16Z owns 20%, and they are sticking by their dude for now. You know, I think that is interesting. I mean, Ashley, to your point earlier about like what's the end game and get there as fast as possible. agree that like they're just kind of throwing a bunch of stuff out there and seeing if public sentiment will be like,
Yeah.
oh, Parker is a spoiled rich kid with bad grades that, sort of kept failing up. Or it's like they are doing that. But I also think like just reading that from a legal standpoint, it seems like the end game is they're going to make a claim that while what Deal did was, unethical, like it was not stealing trade secrets, meaning like
Mhm.
the content of what the spy was stealing was like so innocuous that you couldn't argue that that would give Deal any sort of like real advantage against Rippling. And that's a pretty strong, to me, that's like probably the strongest legal case you can make. It's just like, I don't know. It's still not, it's the strongest, I think, but still weak. And also there's like a precedent to be set here as well, right? Because if it's true that this does happen all the time, then I would want to, sort of like make an example out of this case.
Totally. And there's like the legal outcome, and then there's the public sentiment, which actually matters less, but that's where we mostly focus. But what matters most are employees and customers, right? Like if employees don't want to work at Deal anymore because they feel like the brand is tarnished, that is existential. If customers choosing between Deal and Rippling choose Rippling because they think Deal is not a serious company, like that's existential. And so like I actually feel like those are the audiences that are the most essential. And it's interesting to think about how Deal's response might be geared towards them, in addition to trying to muddy the waters. And then I think, Helen, to your point, I agree that is like their strongest legal argument. And it's probably why they, in their response, were like, oh, well, like Rippling also has like spies and Deal. Like it's no big deal. This is how the world works. Which is crazy.
But it doesn't look great that he's run away to Dubai and they couldn't find him. And then now he's claiming his headquarters or his house is in Israel. So
It's wild. Should we head over to our rapid fire?
let's do it.
All right. This Q&A, as always, is brought to you by Mercury, the fintech used by over 200,000 startups to simplify their finances. And this week's question is a fun one. Do you use executive coaches? And if so, what's the best way to find one?
I have used executive coaches. I've used two. Best way to find them is to ask people, I think, who are maybe trying to up level in similar areas to you, like who they've used. I mean, that's also how I've sourced therapists before. I think my main flag around executive coaches, they can be great. But unlike a therapist, they will tell you their opinions on things. Whereas, therapists are usually about like helping you talk through and find realizations. And so I've actually had very sort of binary experiences with coaches. I actually do not trust this person's judgment at all. And this could only take me in a bad direction. And so I do think that like vetted sourcing is really important. And then I think also being really crisp on like what is your project or desired outcome versus, again, like a therapist can sort of be like maybe a weekly sounding board to how you're feeling. I've found personally that working with a coach of like, I have to make this decision, or I have to like raise my game in this specific way is a really helpful way to scope those engagements.
I've had a couple where like they're either I've had the executive coach that like I sought out, and I paid for out of pocket, or the company provided. Once you get to a certain level, like everybody's just sort of like given a coach. And I had the same coach most of the time that I was at Facebook, and then I think work with her again a little bit at Dropbox, and maybe even at Quora. Her name is Maggie Hensel. She's amazing. I think there are a lot of like these coaches that part of their background is I've coached all these, famous executives. And I think then, you get really like hyped up. You're like, oh my God, I want the coaching playbook for this incredible executive that I look up to. And so I think that's actually quite a different sort of coaching relationship than when you are seeking somebody, yourself. And I think lately, because I'm an emerging manager, like I'm just seeing a lot more of the latter. And I think it's just such a range of like quality, if that makes sense. So whenever somebody asks me this question, I'm like, I think that sometimes people conflate the idea of having an executive coach and somebody who like you can just vent to, and you can just sort of like, air out the things that are not work appropriate. And I'm like, you actually want to find someone else for that. To me, like the best way to get as much as you can out of an executive coach is like truly, sorry for the sports analogy, but like truly treat them like like a sports performance-based coach, where every week it's like, how are you leveling up on all of your skills and goals, and not the sort of like dumping. I mean, ChatGPT is great for that now, right? So like maybe people will start doing that more and more.
It's like a good opportunity for me to plug one of my favorite books, which is $1 Trillion Coach, which is Bill Campbell, who has had a lot of impact on a lot of executives in Silicon Valley.
Good place to end.
Amazing. Great chat, guys.
See you next week.
Woo.
A quick reminder, each week we answer your questions. Don't forget to submit them at anothergreatchat.com. See you next week.